let's go ahead and dive in. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Will Simpson, and we're joined by Nadja today from our Upwork coaches team. Thank you so much for joining us today, Nadja.
Sure, thank you for having me.
All right, so today we're going to be doing a Talent Toolbox project catalog deep dive. Looking forward to this. I am not as familiar with this topic as I am on some of the others, so really looking forward to some expert knowledge here. And just a quick note to everyone in the audience, feel free to ping your questions over to us. We want to have a Q&A session at the end. If you have a question, please make sure you're putting it in the Q&A section, not the chat. The chat moves a bit quickly, so it's hard for us to follow. But feel free to communicate with us through chat. We have Neil monitoring that and providing any answers that we can. Right, with that, let's go ahead and get started. So today we're going to be covering the project catalog best practices, and then we're going to be reviewing some submissions from attendees such as yourself that have said, yeah, go ahead and let me know how we're doing. If you would like to go ahead and submit your proposal, project catalog, or your profile to be considered to be analyzed in one of these types of events, feel free to go ahead and fill out a form. Neil, if you could go ahead and post that in the chat for us, that'd be fantastic. Fill that out, you'll make it onto our list, and then we can go ahead and see if we can get you in on one of these events. So before we get into some of the best practices, I just wanted to get a little context as, you know, I know a lot of us are new to the platform, maybe new to project catalog entirely. So just wanted to get some context of what it is. The project catalog is just a new way to earn on Upwork and give you the option to have clients come to you as opposed to you seeking the clients. They can sort of browse and buy, where they can go ahead and buy your services the same way they buy a product, by finding the product they like and then instantly purchasing it. So now, did you want to speak to some of the advantages to using project catalog?
Yes, of course. So one of the main advantages to having catalog projects is that you basically have less back and forth with the clients, because you kind of set the scope, you set the cost, you set the price, and basically you kind of set your own terms so clients can review it, see if they like it, if this is something that fits what they need, and they can purchase it. Also, one of the advantages that a lot of talent highlights is that you don't have to spend any connects, unlike when you're applying for jobs. And so it just kind of makes it a little bit more efficient for your workflow, because you create the projects, you put them out there, and then you let the clients come to you and contact you. Also, one of the advantages, something that I personally very much like about project catalog, is that you get to work on projects you are passionate about, something you really enjoy doing, and so it's just something you built, and you built it with the scope and the cost and the price that you wanted. So it's a plus there, right? And as I said, it's just that you do more of the work you love to do. So a lot of times I get asked by talent, well, how do I decide what I want to put in project catalog? Well, maybe you can think about fixed price contracts you usually work on, but you can also think about what are some of the things you really enjoy doing and create project offerings for that.
Absolutely. And I also like to think that you probably are attracting a slightly different customer segment. Oftentimes, or at least from my experience, I've seen, having spent a bit of time on the client side, I tend to see that people find one way of avenue to work and they stick with that, not branching into both. So, I mean, you might be fishing in two different pools of clients if you're utilizing both sides, right?
Exactly. It's another, just another avenue for clients to find you. And also it's very helpful, especially for talent that has multiple fields of expertise. So I feel like, project catalog is good for both new talent or experienced talent. But, if you have multiple fields of expertise, and let's say you have your Upwork profile, you've maybe set up 2 specialized profiles, and you still don't find that covers all of your skills. Well, project catalog allows you to actually create up to 20 projects. So you can definitely decide, to offer different things, or even test out some of the new services you might be interested in offering.
Yeah, perfect. So I'd like to get some input from the audience here. Go ahead and drop this in the chat section. What is one of the top factors that you think a client looks for in a project catalog? Curious to get a pulse on where we're at. For me, I would probably say looking for a comprehensive outline of what is provided, on that right-hand side with all the check boxes. I think that's what I like to see, so I know exactly what I'm getting. What about you guys? quick, easy to buy with a clear scope, a good cost, examples of previous work experience, relevant.
Yeah, I love that someone put requirements. So that's very important. You also want to make sure you highlight what you need from the client in order to actually work on this project.
Very good point. It all comes down to sort of outlining the process of how you're going to deliver that thing, right? That's a big part of that, setting the stage
Exactly.
before you start.
Yeah.
All right, perfect. So solving the problems they're looking for and making it turnkey. I love that, Matthew. That's
Me
fantastic.
too.
And you know what? The independent professionals that I have hired off of the project catalog side
Mhm.
have exactly provided that experience where it just seemed good to go. So good feedback. All right. So Nadja, why don't you give us, from your perspective, what are some of the best practices and tips for people to stand out before we dive into some of these reviews?
Sure. Well, what I often see that people struggle with when they start creating projects is the title. So you just want to make sure you kind of, use like a very specific, precise title that is going to tell the client what they're going to get by purchasing your project. The same goes for the project description. Someone mentioned, highlighting how that project solves the client's problem. So make sure you not just talk, you don't want to talk only about yourself and your skill set. You actually want to highlight how those skills help the client. You want to be very clear on the scope. I feel like just offering maybe 3 tiers instead of 1, and we're going to talk about this a little more, is just better because it offers more customization, right? And you can always add the additional add-ons for the client to purchase so they can again customize the project furthermore. One thing I feel a lot of people kind of disregard when it comes to project catalog is the frequently asked questions section. So this is something I definitely suggest adding there because it does help have this less back and forth with the client, and clients can learn more about the project and how you would want to work with them before they even purchase the project, or at least like they don't need to contact you before they decide to make the purchase. And then being very clear about the requirements. So what do you need from the client to get started on the project, and the steps you'll take from the point you receive these requirements, they fulfill the requirements, to the point you deliver the final product. Yeah, and so maybe the one thing that I definitely also would like to highlight, and I feel this is a good point for us to maybe check out the first project, is to make sure your project, so your project offering is cohesive with your Upwork profile. So the same way the projects are displayed in your Upwork profile, they're also, so the snippets of your profile are also going to show up in your project. And so while you can have obviously multiple fields of expertise and you can showcase all of that in your profile, you still want to make sure that your profile and your project is cohesive, because if the client is interested in learning more about you, they can access your profile via direct link. They can see your portfolio as well if you have one, and they want to make sure you are the professional and they can learn more about your experience within this particular field that you decided to create a project offering for. And so that's also another best practice. And so we talked about also choosing a very precise title, something that is obviously well formatted and not too long. And here I'd like to suggest one thing. Always try to put yourself in the client's shoes, right? Think from the client perspective. What are some of the keywords the client would use to search for your project, right? And so think of it, from that perspective. Would maybe, an impactful, professional presentation be something the client would search for, or would they search for something else? At the end of the day, it's obviously your choice how you decide to how you decide to name your project, but just think about it from a client perspective, because you want to be very clear on what the client is going to receive by purchasing this project, starting from the title throughout all of other sections.
Yeah.
Um,
Perfect. Well, let's take a look at this one. I'm going to point out a few things that are catching my eye, and then I'll pass it to you
of
for a much
course.
more detailed overlook. So, taking a look at this, my initial impression, I like the cleanliness of the cover image they have there. I see
Yes.
also that they have a second image here.
Hmm.
Scroll over, so a little bit of it, a little bit of a carousel there. I like that we have 3 tiers of service here and a decent amount of detail on what they're providing. So that from a gut perspective
Exactly.
there, that is coming across well so far. And let's
Yes.
come down here. Project. And, well, let's what do we do section by section? What have I
Yeah.
missed on this section?
Well, I love also that you know, that Tiana decided to go for 3 project tiers. We can always create a project using a, you know, 1 project tier or 3 project tiers. But as I stated already, I really like when Talent opts for 3-tier structure because it gives more choice to the client, and it also allows the talent to kind of customize their offering. I know that one of the most common, you know, initially, I think a talent would say that it's really difficult to customize a project in project catalogs. So I feel like introducing the 3-tier structure is definitely something that helps with this, as well as using the add-ons. So this is something that you can kind of add to your project, you know, just something clients can purchase for extra dollars. And you can decide whether it's like a, you know, like any custom add-on that you think would be, you know, be helpful for your project, like for example, like fast delivery time, right, or anything else that you feel could be helpful, like additional number of revisions, right? So this is really good, and I love that this independent professional decided to go for that tier. Sorry, for that tier structure. Um, okay, and then when it comes to obviously the project gallery, you mentioned that one. This will probably depend on the category you're in and you're creating a project for. Sometimes when your work is very visual, you'll definitely want to make sure you have more examples of your work within the image gallery. You can even add videos. I think you can add PDF files, obviously, if you want to showcase maybe like an article you wrote or anything else of that sort. But you still want to make sure that you choose a cover image that actually represents your work and what the project is about.
Some good advice that I'd received in one of my previous sessions when the independent professional was asking, I work in data analytics, let's say. They're like, what sort
Mm-hmm.
of image should I put for data analytics? Or I work in accounting. I can't just put that, tax documents up there. And sort of one of the good ideas that came out is if you're working in one of those industries where you can't, whether you like me, I'm a graphic designer. So if I just make a picture, I can just
Yes.
slap a picture on there. But if I'm working in one of these more intangible ones, you can make an infographic, or you can use just a stock image, sort of lifestyle image thing as just an intro and add information to it. So you can say, like, I'm an accountant, I increase ROI, or whatever the things accountants are doing. These are my success points and the way I do business.
Exactly.
You can hire a freelancer on Upwork to go ahead and make it look pretty if you don't have the graphic design skills yourself, and then you put it there. But that, in the absence of nothing, I think makes a huge difference, don't you think?
Yes, I love that. I think it's, you know, it does take some work to find the proper cover image for your project, especially if you're not in, let's say, graphic design field. But one thing to be aware of is I think according to Upwork's guidelines, you shouldn't have too much text in your cover image. And also make sure you don't share any contact information, obviously, that you shouldn't share, in your profile proposals. The same goes for project catalog.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um,
Should we move down
yeah,
to the next section here?
yes, that would be
All
great.
right.
Let's take a look at
So,
the project description
so the
and some
project
of the project.
details.
Yeah, so these are project details. They'll consist of project description, project attributes, and then you also see, again, what's included in these 3 service tiers. And so, I think the best way to kind of tackle the project description is just to make sure you really, highlight what problem you're solving for the client, how your skill set and your experience actually helps them, and what obviously the project is about. As far as the length goes, I think there's, I wouldn't suggest making it, probably like too short nor too long, but it really depends on how you're kind of talking to the client and how you're tackling what they might need, rather than just, what you included there. Make sure you don't talk too much about yourself, just because, again, clients can see the snippets of your profile a little bit below this, and they can access your profile and they can learn about you, right? They want to know what they're getting by purchasing the project. And so I definitely focus the attention on that there.
That's actually similar to the logic that when we were talking with Tiffany on the proposals. Same sort of
Yes,
logic. It's an easy trap to fall into when, as a graphic designer, I can say, I do this, I know this program, I can do this,
exactly.
and then you go back and you look at it and you're like, okay, this is only about me. Whereas
Yeah,
the client cares very little about Will. The client cares,
exactly.
can Will help me do a good job on the project that I need done? So making it more about the client and their project and less about I.
Exactly.
But it's
So
a
the
challenge that we
more,
all face.
yes, exactly. And I feel like the more experienced we are, the easier it is for us to talk about ourselves in this way, because you keep thinking about like, well, I have all this experience, and you try, listing it out and talking about your skill set and your previous projects and all of this, so that you show the client that you can help them. But it's not just about including that, it's about how you talk about it, right? So
Yeah.
not just saying, well, I know how to do this, and I have this skill set, and I have this many years of experience, and I've worked on this and that project, but it's about like, using that same experience and skill set, and saying, well, because of this project, I can help you with XYZ, and I can
Yes.
solve this project. So it's just about like wording it right. It's not about like not actually talking about yourself, because obviously clients do want to know this and they're interested in it. But if they just look at it and see, well, this person is talking about themselves, but how does that help me? As a client, I want to know that. And so just, again, put yourself in a client perspective, and try to think about, is my project talking to the client and to their challenge?
Yeah, there was an interesting thing that came up in my last meeting with Hilda when we were talking about, I think, again, proposals. And we sort of discovered that when you have one of those situations where you're talking about, I do this, I can do this, I have these skills, you can still use that information if you slightly reframe. So
Yes,
I am an expert in Photoshop is maybe what it says originally. I can change that to be, I leverage my expertise in Photoshop to ensure that your graphic design projects shine. I'm bringing it.
exactly.
I'm listing what I'm good at, but I made the subject core about the actual client themselves,
Exactly.
and
So you
and using
you
that
want to
logic.
connect that. Yeah, exactly. So there's nothing wrong with us, like, obviously bragging about our skills and experience, and telling about it. But it's just about whether you make the connection with what the client actually needs and how that helps them. And so it's just about like rephrasing it sometimes, rather than just like
Absolutely.
changing the description completely. Yeah.
One other
And
thing that
so,
stands out to me
mhm,
on this one too is
mhm.
the project detail is nice. It's a little bit brief, but the thing
Yes.
that stands out to me a lot is industry. It looks like they've checked every industry, and I'm curious. Visually, to me, this takes away a little bit. But in regards to the mechanics of the system, is it beneficial to have every thing listed? Or I don't really know the mechanics of how, if someone's searching for it, how that plays
Yeah.
in. Do you?
Yes. So basically the thing here is, I also find that, especially with this, when you opt for such a short project overview or project description, this does look a little too much, but it's helpful in terms of search, because when clients search for, let's say, a presentation design project, right, or content, they'll check the industry they're in, and they'll want to make sure they see only the people freelancers that can help them with this particular field, right, and this particular
Right.
industry. And so if this person has had experience with all these industries, or for her, she can do the research and she doesn't have to focus so much on one particular industry, then yes, I think it could be helpful. It's just about making sure that you do have this particular experience. And what I like about this is that instead of her listing it all out in the project details and saying, well, I've worked with all these industries, she actually has an option to, check the industries. So these are the project attributes, and a client's going to kind of see there. And it's very, very helpful when it comes to the search results.
Perfect. So next down here, this was something you mentioned earlier in the what's included in the different service tiers. I like the level of detail here. I know how many revisions I get, the number of slides, are they going to do charts and graphs or animations? To me, if I was shopping, and the add-ons you were mentioning down the bottom here for fast delivery. So this to me looks very modular, meaning the client can sort of pick and choose what they need. But to me, this is a very, very well done. What about from your perspective?
Yes, I love it. Well, what the good thing about this is that you don't actually have to build it like this yourself. You're going to kind of decide how many tiers you want. You're going to decide what you'll include in these tiers and how much you want to price them. And then if obviously you have any add-ons you'd like to add to it, and then this is what it's going to turn out when you publish. This is what it's going to look like when you actually publish the project. But I do like this particular bit because it's a lot helpful than what you see on the right side of your screen. So
right here,
I find it a little bit more helpful to kind of understand what you're actually getting within these service tiers.
Absolutely.
One thing to know there, I do want to make sure this is clear, is that what's included. So, some of these things are going to be, are going to be available to you depending on the category you're in. So you're not going to be able to customize all of these, but it's gonna, depend on which category you choose your project to be in, which is a very important thing. You want to make sure you choose the right category for your project so that A, your project gets approved, and B, you actually do show up in the relevant search results when clients are, searching for your project.
Yeah. There's a good point from one of our attendees here. Sam was mentioning that it felt that there was a bit of a disconnect between the lead image, which is up at the top here, which seems very like a maternity shoot or something in that industry, and yet a lot of the industries they service seem to be more like business oriented. So you're accurate there, Sam. If this professional is trying to address multiple industries, it might be a good idea to choose in this carousel some different themed deck, like maybe one more corporate, one more industrial, maybe it might be a good idea, or try and niche down to that birth sort of industry.
So. That's a very, very good point. What I'd be curious to see is if I were the client, like obviously that would be a great approach. What could sometimes be the case that if you've signed an NDA and you can't really showcase the portfolio example, well, then maybe you kind of have to showcase just some of the things you worked on, but you do have experience within other industries. So maybe what could also be a good solution here is either you mention this and maybe you can tackle it in your project description or somewhere in the Q&A, like maybe, thinking from a client perspective, well, do you only have experience with this particular field in an industry, or you do have, and then you can kind of respond there. This is where the frequently asked questions come in handy. Tiana unfortunately didn't include frequently asked questions. So as I said, I feel that, just think about what are some of the questions you normally get asked by clients or things that from a client perspective, you'd want to know. Maybe even you can share it with, a friend and ask them, well, does this sound clear to you? What would you ask me if you were the client, right? Sometimes we can't really think of it ourselves, but it does ensure that you don't have to have as much back and forth with the client before they purchase the project. So it's definitely one of the advantages of having frequently asked questions.
Perfect.
And then
should I go on to the next one here? I know I want to leave time for Q&A. Was there anything else you wanted to touch on this one before I show our next one here?
I think that we can maybe tackle it and talk about the steps and requirements in our next project. I feel like this is something that we can talk about there. This is one of another project where I think this particular freelancer actually, he created 12 projects, which we can't see here, but I did take a look at it. And I think this is an amazing thing to do. We mentioned that you can have up to 20 project offerings. And so this does ensure that you have more visibility. Obviously, try not to create, same project offering 20 times, but if you do have multiple fields of expertise or you're testing different services and you're not sure whether you still want to include all of that within your, profile or specialized profiles, then, having project offerings and catalog can be a great way to get started on that. With that said, I'm not going to comment too much on his title. I feel like it's a good title, very specific. All of his projects have very, very specific, in my opinion, exactly, search-friendly titles. But then again, this is going to depend on the industry as well. And so just one thing that I want to highlight here as a best practice, because this person has 12 projects, when you have multiple projects, you do want to make sure you manage your availability through My Project Dashboard. So whenever you update your availability or visibility on your Upwork profile, this is not going to reflect on your projects. So you want to make sure you turn each of them off if you don't have the availability to work on them. And the same way, once you have the availability, you can actually turn them back on. So have that in mind. I've had a situation that it happened to me that I forgot to turn one of my projects off. And so I was out of office and someone purchased the project, but still, when you have multiple projects, this is definitely something to think about to make sure you manage. And
one
so
thing
maybe,
sorry, go for it.
Please do. No, go for it. No,
I was just saying, one thing that I noticed in comparison to the previous one we just looked at, I noticed the brevity here on the right-hand side. Very, very minimal information, which, hey, depending on what they're providing, may be applicable. But it's also very brief here. Now, from my own perspective, let's say I know nothing about the category that these people do. I'm on Upwork to find a professional because I am woefully ignorant on it. If there's not context that is newbie friendly, then you might be missing out on some clients that would be intimidated if it's all technical jargon, which a lot of this is, not all of it, but some of these things may not make sense to someone that is seeking that type of person. What is your thoughts on that?
So I find this particular project description very well organized. However, we did talk about this in the previous one where we said, well, this person listed all of the services they include, right? But I'd personally like to see as a client how these services actually help me, especially thinking for, well, maybe I'm not that technical. So there's one thing to, obviously, each can make their own decision. Sometimes there's talent that actually prefers not to work with clients who don't understand the technical terms and don't know maybe what they're looking for. But like, as you said, if you're trying to cater to a wider audience, then you do want to make sure that you make it, you kind of translate that into how that actually how these particular tools help me and what they can do for me and how you can help me utilize them best for my business, maybe, so I do agree with that.
Let's see here. So still a little bit brief in here, which is fine.
Exactly. Could be also because of the category, so not necessarily something you can always control, but maybe some additional some optional add-ons could be helpful. I like that obviously this freelancer this independent professional included the frequently asked questions. That's very important. We talked about this. This is what it looks like. And so, sometimes the things that you mentioned in your project description, you can actually clarify in the questions.
This is super helpful. This paints a pretty good picture for me of what do we need for setup. I need admin access to these, and these.
Yes.
What do you need?
Exactly.
And then some common issues. Like, to me, the frequently asked questions here have done a fantastic job. I would actually like to see some of this content perhaps displayed up in the project detail, just a little bit. You use of more full sentences and a little bit of perspective. Just because if someone scrolls, how many times is someone going to scroll until you catch their interest? So it's good to kind of catch that interest up at the top here, but really good job on the FAQ. I also just wanted to call out, I love his profile picture here. It's sharp, sort of edgy, very, very well done. Yeah, it's really good.
Very good. I like
Which I
it
know
too.
it sounds like a small detail, but honestly, people buy with their first gut instincts, and if their first gut instinct is you look like
Definitely.
you're in sweats in the corner with Cheeto wrappers, you're gonna get less jobs. So he's
Exactly.
done a great job.
Looking at it from a client perspective, yes. Although, we want to say that we don't really care about that, but this is, subconsciously we do notice these things, and
Yeah.
yeah, definitely good job for him. And then I think we wanted to talk a little bit more just about the steps and the requirements. So this is something that is a common mistake that I've seen when talent create project catalog. They'll include the requirements in the steps and vice versa. So you want to make sure you understand that the requirements are everything you need from the client to just, even get started on the project. And then the steps are everything you will do from the point you receive those requirements, you receive what you need from the client until you deliver the final product. And you want to make sure it's very easy for the client to understand those steps. So don't address it within one step. Also, in my opinion, using a step like this, like requirements gathering, is a little bit redundant, just because you do have the requirements section first that kind of tells the client what they might need.
You're talking about
um
in the FAQ section?
no, if you scroll down, you have the section steps for completing your project, and then up,
Uh-huh. Yep. Okay.
just below the profile, the snippets of the profile. Yes. And so the first step is, after purchasing the project, send requirements so Muhammad can start the project. And these are the requirements you set for the client. So I'd want these requirements probably to be a little bit more precise and clear. And then the second thing you'll see is these are actually the steps I, as an independent professional, will take to work on your project after I've received the requirements. So
Mhm.
a lot of times, people aren't very clear about this or not very precise. Sometimes talent will include steps within the requirements within steps. So it's a little bit messy for the client to understand what's going on.
Yeah.
Um,
I see what you're
yeah,
saying. That the requirements sort of bleed over from here also into requirements gathering. So it seems like
exactly.
that redundancy you were mentioning. I get you.
And it's also important to think about, what do I need from the client to get started on the project? But sometimes we tend to ask for too much. Maybe you don't really need all of that. So just make sure you don't overwhelm the client with the amount of things you don't necessarily need, right?
You could
But
also sort of umbrella categorize some things, like I will need admin
yes,
access to these types of programs. You may not have to list out
exactly.
75 programs.
Exactly, exactly,
Perfect.
exactly. Yeah,
Any
perfect.
last comments before I move to the next one? We got time to
Um,
squeak in one more, I think, before Q&A.
I think we can like quickly just cover some additional tips, which is like, first of all, you don't, we didn't check this price in that much detail, but you definitely want to make sure you proofread, because it does show this attention to detail. And then if you're thinking, and I think this is also probably going to be one of the questions, but if you're thinking about how to price your tiers, well, the
Mm,
best thing to do is to benchmark, go and search for other catalog projects. And just see what other people did there, like how they organized their project description, what they included in their service tiers, how they priced it, right? And so I think this is one thing to also consider.
yeah.
Um, yeah. And shall we take a look at the last project?
Yeah, so here we have the last one. It's a branding individual. Look,
Yeah.
flat one, minimalist brand. I like good 3 tiers, lots of detail here. I love that. I
Yeah.
also just love the carousel images here.
Me too. I feel
Good
like
use
it's
of
very
contrast.
exactly, very clear, very professional. Obviously this is, logo design project. So the independent professional decided to include some of their portfolio examples. Obviously, you don't have to include everything you've ever created, but you do want to highlight some of the, most important work. And we talked about the project gallery, so maybe we don't have to spend too much time talking about that.
Yeah.
But I do want to mention one thing, because I checked this person's profile, and I think that it's important to also consider diversifying the project offering. If you have diverse skill set, or just think about like, maybe because, he's talking also about brand identity design, logo design. Well, maybe you can have one project for logo design specifically. Maybe you can have one project offering for brand identity design, something that is, a little bit more holistic, right? So,
Right.
just think about this. And obviously, I feel like this project description here is very good example of a project description that speaks to the client. So I very much
Yeah.
like the tone of the description.
Yeah, I like the
I think,
personalization. Are you looking for a unique
yes,
logo? Okay, relax. So a little bit of levity, a little bit of personality, which I
exactly.
think is
Showing your
good.
personality. Yeah,
Yeah.
this is the way
And
you want to
then
connect with the client, right?
yeah, and what we were talking about earlier, I love this statement. How can I help you? Ah, that's what the client wants
Exactly.
to know. How can you
This
help
is what
me?
we were talking about. This is exactly what we were talking about.
And I love
Yeah,
it.
so I
They
feel
want to
like
hear the
this
story
is,
first and then identify the
yeah,
problems. I think this
yeah.
is masterfully written.
Exactly. And so one thing that I did notice about this project is what we were talking about when it comes to requirements and steps is it's a little bit unclear about what steps this person will take to actually complete the project. So you just want to make sure you actually divide steps into, what you will do first and then second, and then, up to like delivering the final um, product.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I guess like in addition to this, this isn't something that obviously you can see now when we're scrolling through projects, but you want to make sure that you do include optional search tags, something which is going to be available in the project creation process. This isn't, as I said, visible anywhere in Project Catalog, but it does help further categorize your project.
Oh,
And it does help with search results. So it's almost like a skill tags that you choose for your profile. You can have up to 5 search tags. And I highly recommend that everyone includes them when they're actually creating the projects.
now, if you don't know what tags to use on that, as I'm, correct me if I'm wrong here, but so you wouldn't be able to go and look at someone else's project catalog and see
No,
what tags they use because they're not visible. So it'll be a little bit of a A/B testing to find out, or looking at how
exactly.
clients are framing it and trying to replicate what they're doing, right?
Exactly. Or even just thinking about, I can pick 5 keywords to describe my project. What are the 5 keywords I'd choose? Sometimes it's going to be, maybe like in here, in this case, logo design, graphic design. Maybe there's going to be like a tool you'll want to mention, right? So just think about it from that perspective, almost like picking skill tags for your profile. Unfortunately, you can't check this anywhere, but it does bottle down to just, choosing the right keywords and kind of testing it out.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, would you suggest, I don't know if this is a good practice or not, tell me, if I am new to it, I'm not really sure how best to present it, couldn't you do A/B testing? You mentioned that we can put up to 20 projects listed. If I'm playing around and trying to figure out what are my best cover images, what's the best way to describe it, is it a good idea to post basically the same offering, just presented completely differently, or no?
That's a great idea. Why
Is
not?
it good?
There's
Okay,
nothing that
cool.
really prevents you from doing that, and you can exactly see what's gonna show up more in search, what's gonna catch clients' attention, what type of questions they might have, right? So you can
Right.
even play with the pricing, with tiers, with the image gallery, the questions, the requirements. So you can really pretty much test out anything there.
Perfect. It looks like this person has quite a lot of good FAQs too. How do I start my order process? What is your
Exactly.
process?
I like that he also included what is your working process, just because sometimes clients are going to browse catalog to find talent that they want to collaborate with and maybe offer them a fixed price or an hourly contract. But what's really helpful with Project Catalog is it plays a role almost of a portfolio example. So it shows the clients what type of projects you can kind of help them with and what your working process is. So what your methodology is, how you work, what your values are. And so a lot of times they don't even look for a project they want to purchase in Project Catalog. They just want to find a person and learn more about their way of working through Project Catalog without having to post a job or in addition to posting a job.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that the few times that I've hired off of Project Catalog, they oftentimes ended up being custom contracts anyway that weren't actually part of the thing.
Yes,
It started off as, hey, I love that you do logos, but hey, do you also do X, Y, and Z? They're like, yeah, we'll just do a fixed price
exactly.
with milestones. So it sort of
Exactly.
evolved into bigger business, but the project catalog was a great way for them to statically grab my attention, prove their authenticity or expertise, and then from there
Right.
they got a lot more business than what was listed there. So
And
absolutely.
another way you can utilize your catalog projects is also when you're applying for jobs or responding to job invites in the marketplace. You can sometimes, if someone is asking for some type of test work, probation work, you can actually submit. So you can send them one of your projects and tell them, hey, why don't you purchase this like project, maybe like a starter service tier, and we can see how we're working together if you like my work, and then we can decide if we want to move forward with a long-term contract.
Absolutely. So I'm looking here at the steps for completing the project. This one looks a little bit more streamlined. Is this sort of the right frame for it?
I like the requirements, but as I said, I think that the steps should not be my working process. I feel like it should be step by step what the working process would be here, even if it's like super simple, right? We still want to make sure the client understands, step by step. I just think like visually it would be so much easier for the
Yeah,
client.
absolutely. Perfect. Anything else on here, or should we jump into the Q&A session?
I think we can jump into Q&A section. I'm pretty sure
All right.
people are going to have amazing questions, and we're going to get, a lot more. We can definitely cover
Absolutely.
more things that are relevant to Project Catalog.
So while I look through some of these questions here, go ahead and drop in the chat section. What is one thing that you're going to try in your project catalog based on what we've been speaking about so far? So let me go into the Q&A section here and we'll pull some questions to discuss. So this is a good question. I assume the project catalog clients are looking for a really tight turnaround, like 24 to 48 hours. I've noticed the same, Derek, for a lot of the things on project catalog, at least that I've hired for, it looked like it was quick turnaround. Nadja, from your experience, are longer term projects typically posted on project catalog?
Well, from what I've seen, I also feel like people first look for something that is going to be, a fast delivery type of project. But yeah, as I said, there are a lot of clients who are going to browse your projects. They're going to see if they like the way you presented it, what your process is, and then maybe either test it out by purchasing this like shorter term project, or then offering a longer term collaboration. I feel like the way, this is my personal opinion, I feel like the way project catalog is kind of designed now at this point, it's a little bit harder to offer something that is more long term, right? So you'd either have to have, let's say, your client purchase one of your projects multiple times. Let's say if it's like a consultation type of project, right? It's a little bit difficult to sell like a long-term collaboration, but I don't think it's needed. This is why we have the marketplace as well, right? So it's kind of something you can definitely combine. It doesn't have to be either project catalog or the marketplace.
That actually brings up to address a point that's in the chat, questions in the chat too. Is the project catalog Upwork's focus to channel? No. Actually, especially as Nadja was just mentioning, clients like to interact in different ways. Some people like to receive the information. Some people like to go find the information and then only selectively choose to engage. A push versus pull approach is what I usually phrase it as. And so it's not meant to replace the existing workflow or change the way people do it. It's simply providing a different way for clients to interact and for you to passively have a line in the water to get a job too. So not meant to replace, meant to augment. Great question.
Exactly. And I mean, like, also it's kind of very, I think, logical that when you as a client don't have a lot of time and you're in a rush, you need someone to do a project for you really fast, you're probably not gonna initially go and post a job, because it does require more time than actually just browsing catalog. It's very simple, a couple of keywords, scrolling through some projects, and then instantly purchasing it, especially when people are offering like 24-hour delivery time. Well, what's better than that?
It's attractive. It's definitely attractive from the client side.
Yeah.
I'm seeing some really good responses to what people are trying. A lot of A/B testing. I love to see that. I'll tell you what, I did it the hard way when I was first ramping up, and it took me months. And then as soon as I started doing A/B testing, I got it locked in within like a week and a half. So
It's
super
a very good
useful.
tip. I love the idea.
Yeah. And a lot of people are asking about, how to set your pricing. And I know Nadja spoke to this earlier, but I just wanted to refresh it in everyone's mind. The one of the strongest ways to figure out what your pricing can be, or at least get it some perspective, is to look at what other people are doing in the same space. So myself in graphic design, whenever it's time to adjust my prices, which I try and do every year, if not every half year, depending on how much I've grown, I will go and look at the people in the graphic design silo, the people that are 5-star rated, the people that have good client reviews, solid JSS, and have made a decent amount of money. Point being is I set the filters so that I'm looking at the people that are most successful in my category. And then I go and look through the portfolio items that they have. And I say, Will, can I create that? And if the answer is yes, I'd be like, okay, how much are they charging for that? Or if I'm not really that, my skill is not there yet. Okay, I should probably come in a little bit under here. But using that, I get a benchmark, as you're mentioning, benchmarking, to find out, okay, I can design a little bit more advanced than this person charging $50, but I can't do the $100. So maybe $75 is a place for me to start. And I found that to be very helpful in trying out different pricing. Let me see. It's a good
That's an
question
amazing
from.
strategy, definitely.
Yeah.
Something I
Well,
suggest too.
yeah,
I
I
know
mean,
that a lot of people get confused by if they think they have to be the client to actually search browse project catalog, but you can do that with your freelancer account. You just switch the search from jobs to projects, and you basically play around with filters. And I feel like this also gives you a chance to learn better, what the client experience is, and to get your, to kind of then think about creating projects from a client perspective.
yeah. There's a good question here on the process of how it actually executes. So once a client agrees to purchase the project from Project Catalog, do they then put the payment on Upwork, or does Upwork create a sort of milestone fixed price workflow? What's the execution look like?
So it's exactly the same as fixed price projects work. So if you're not familiar with this, I definitely suggest that you go and look at the Help Center article related to fixed price projects, so you kind of understand what that works like. But it's exactly the same. It's treated as a fixed price project.
Yeah. Okay. So it triggers that workflow, and then they can from there add different milestones if they like. So going down that
Exactly.
workflow.
Exactly.
Very good.
One important thing to notice here is just that when the client, so your clock starts ticking from the point client actually submits their requirements, not from the point they purchase the project. So that's one thing to have in mind.
And then a question that's come up a few different ways. What's the best way for people to access Project Catalog? I know I'm guilty of just going on Google and putting an Upwork Project Catalog. Is there a more internal workflow that people can go click?
Yeah, exactly. So if you're not the client, if you're a freelancer, then the easiest way to do it is to log into your account and click on the downward pointing arrow in the search box, and switch from jobs, which is automatically what it's set to projects. Type any keyword and you can access Project Catalog, or Google it like Will.
Yeah, luckily all the Upwork like support sides, recordings, everything's super well indexed and right there on the top. So I know it's cheating, but
Exactly.
it's the quickest distance between 2 points sometimes.
Exactly.
Oh, here's a great question. Can you create project catalogs as an agency, or can you only do it as an individual?
I think it's available for agencies now. I haven't worked with agencies myself, and I haven't had experience purchasing agency projects, but I think it's out there. I think this is something that is available at this point.
Yeah, a good question here also. Ellen's asking, on one of the profiles we were looking at, or the portfolios, sorry, project catalogs we were looking at here, where did the text about them come from? Was that something that they put in there, or was that pulling from their profile, their general Upwork
Yes.
profile?
Yes, that's actually from the general Upwork profile. So it's
Okay.
automatically pulled there. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. So I
This
guess it
is
would be
why we talked
important,
about making sure it's kind of cohesive with what you have in
right?
your profile.
And I'm just
Yeah.
trying to think if someone's really niched down. So let's say I do graphic design and I do accounting, two very different things. if I were doing a project catalog, I would need my general profile to address both of those things because it's going to show up on
Yes.
both. Whereas
Yes.
I can have two specialized profiles separate from project catalog, one for accounting,
Exactly.
one for graphic design, but then the whole system is in alignment. Is that a correct
Exactly.
read?
Exactly. For me, it does make more sense to organize your profiles like that and then project catalog.
Absolutely. This is a good question here. This individual wants to know how their project catalog listing is doing. Is there any way to see any statistics, like how many times it's been viewed, or anything like that that we can see analytics or not? No.
I wish. Unfortunately, at this point, this isn't something that you can see, but I think it's something that is going to be available in the future, just like you have stats for your profile.
Right.
Also, don't be disappointed if you're searching in project catalog and you can't see your project come up, or it's not in the top few projects that show up, because this is going to be different for every single person that searches catalog. So it's also not the best way to test if how your project is showing up in search.
Yeah. And this is a fantastic question from Lee, and a question we get in just about every event. It's a very hot topic for sure. He's talking about the race to the bottom price-wise. It's a usual go-to strategy for people that are new to any platform, where the assumption is that the best way to get some clients under your belt and some reviews done is to just set your price the lowest it can be. I know from my experience, while that may seem like a good idea, it never plays out well. Can you speak more to that, Nadja?
Yes, this is something that I see a lot of independent professionals who are new to Upwork do. I wouldn't suggest that, because I think it has bad long-term consequences for you. So while initially it might draw some clients to your profile, it's or your project, right? First of all, what I think all clients are gonna think first is not, oh, this person is new to Upwork, but they're gonna think, well, this person's work is probably not that high quality. So this is probably like the initial assumption they'll have, and it's also probably gonna attract the wrong clients, not the ones that you want to work
Yeah.
with. So I feel like it's always worth trying to invest more time into making sure that you do highlight what your value is, how you can help the client, show portfolio examples, show testimonials, show that you have experience outside of Upwork while you're new to the platform, and invest more time in being proactive, maybe sharing your project on social media, responding to job invites, applying for more projects, right? We're talking a little bit more about proposals and profile as well now, but it's worth investing that time, and then making sure you find the clients who are basically going to pay what your worth is, because long term, then you're not going to have to negotiate with clients who are going to look at your work history and say, well, you charged so low for this particular project, and you have to explain all over again. Yes, but I was new to the platform, I wanted to build my reputation. You actually don't have to go through that. So,
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
hey, maybe it's worked for someone, so it's definitely up to you to test the strategy, to think about it, but like try to focus on, again, showing your value first.
Yeah, absolutely. I found that the clients, the cheapest clients I've had, have needed and wanted the most from me and been the squeakiest wheels, whereas the clients that I build way higher than I usually do just to see what happens, they've been lovely.
Yes,
They've trusted that they've hired a professional because they've paid good
exactly.
money to hire a professional. So they trust your judgment. They're far more willing to let you lead them to the correct answer. And the whole experience is just way better. And I'd much rather one higher paying client than two lower paying clients that are constantly trying to revive my attention and get it, nickel and dime. Not to say that
Exactly.
there's
And
no
this is,
value in there, but it's
of
just
course,
setting yourself up for success, I feel.
and it's also just like making sure you know how to negotiate your value. Like, you know, write down some talking points and try to think about like, well, I'm going to charge higher than maybe some other freelancers within my category or field of, field of expertise. But I know that I know for a fact that I can help the client faster. They're going to have, long-term results. They're going to receive higher quality work. And these are the things you can, openly say to the client. And I feel like, the right client is always going to value that.
Absolutely. There's a good question here from Darius asking for an example of A/B testing and project catalog. I wanted to give some framework on that before the buzzer here, because I think it's a very important topic. So what I mean by A/B testing for project catalog is I could post, let's just use logo. I create logos. So I'll do one where I'm selling the same service in A and B, but I'm presenting the information differently. So in A, I may say, high quality business logos would be the title. And on the other title, it may be minimalistic, clean logos for professionals. It's different ways of phrasing the same thing. And then you can see when you phrase things differently, tag it differently, maybe use different ways of profiles, the project, the examples of your work. But you're basically trying to point towards the same thing in a different way. And then you can see, wow, 90% of people responded to this one, but only 10% of people, one person responded and 9 people responded there, then you know that this is a better copy. It's attracting the clients you're looking for. And then with that, you take the copy that works, you make it the new A, and then you do it again. You make a new B. And then you do that process maybe 2 or 3 times, and boy, howdy, does it work well. It dials it in real quick. Exactly. So I highly recommend it. Let me see, we could probably squeeze in one more question here. A lot of the more technical questions, folks, if you're looking for like some of the nuances on, how do you do X, Y, and Z, Neil, if you wouldn't mind dropping in the chat the link to the project catalog in the support side. There's a lot of fantastic articles there that walk through exactly what you need. So let me see. Here's a fun comment. When I surpass top-rated status and become a leading freelancer in my field, can I buy you 2 a drink? Absolutely. We'd love to.
Yes, please.
Very sweet of you. Let me see. Oh, there was a good question here. If you revise your existing project catalog posting, does it re-trigger the Upwork approval process? And if so, how long does that take?
Yes, great question. Anytime you make any edits to your project, it's going to undergo the review process all over again. Obviously, if it's a minor edit, it's going to be very fast. I think the process is usually up to 5 business days long, but sometimes, I've had situations where my projects would get approved within the same business day if it's like a very small update to it. But like usually I think it's up to 5 business days that the process is gonna take. Also, it might require some changes, and you're gonna get specific feedback from the project catalog team around what you need to change in order to get your project approved. So, no worries if it doesn't get approved straight away. You're just gonna have to update that, or you start from scratch and then submit it for review, right? Up to you.
So it might be recommended that if you're planning on making multiple changes to your listing, perhaps make all of the changes in one go and hit submit, yes, rather than doing 5 separate submittance. I have a feeling that might slow down the process.
Exactly, definitely. Yeah.
So folks, as we close out here, thank you so much for all the engagement. I know we didn't get to all the questions, but join us for the next session here. You'll see it's an invite internally like you did before. When we close out, there will be a little survey for feedback. Your feedback really helps us dial in what content to talk about, what topics are most helpful to you. So if you wouldn't mind taking a moment, that would really help us out. I want to say thank you to Nadja for joining us and sharing your expertise on this. It's a very important part of freelancing here. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome. I loved talking to you, and I loved all the questions. So I feel like we're gonna, we're gonna make the next event even better based on what we learned here.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of the week, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Bye-bye now.
Thank you. Bye.